we're back. Welcome to the Constitution Line by Line. I'm Paul Fabrizio.
And I'm Don Frazier, and here we go. One more line.
Yes, indeed. All right, we're Article 1, Section 8, Clause 2. Are you ready?
Ready to go. What's our line?
So, to lay it out, Congress shall have the power, here we go, to borrow money on the credit of the United States.
That's floating paper.
You explain what you mean by that.
Well, I mean,
those are words that often aren't heard.
Yeah, I mean, that's bonds. Essentially, they can take out loans, and these can be foreign loans, or these can be loans that are essentially raised from the population itself. So, essentially, it has the ability to incur debt.
That's it.
And this is part and parcel of every bylaws and articles of incorporation and things like that. Anytime you're part of an organization, you're going to have a charter that says this is what the board can do, or this is what the chief executive can do. And always there is this question of, can they borrow money? Because think about what that means. If you've got a credit card, a corporate credit card, you're borrowing money on behalf of the corporation. And essentially that's what we're talking about here is Congress are the guys that are going to incur debt.
Yes. Let's think about that for a second, because this stands in contrast to most of the states which are required to have a balanced budget. Congress doesn't have that requirement. And since World War II, people have introduced constitutional amendments to require a balanced budget on the part of the U.S. government, and they've never succeeded.
Why?
Because deep down inside, every politician knows the U.S. government has to have the ability to go into debt.
Alexander Hamilton, who was a rapping fool apparently, and was a
play about it.
Yeah, he was big on Broadway back in the
day.
Yeah, because I'm sure I'll start getting
17 and 18.
I'll start getting that on test here in no time. He actually thought that national debt was useful.
Yes. Go ahead.
Well, I was wondering what you were going to lay on. Because it gives other people skin in our game.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there's other countries that are our creditors, they're going to be betting on our success.
Right.
So.
Important point.
That's right. That's why I help support my children through college. I'm betting on their success.
Is that the reason?
Well,
yeah.
And they look at you all doe-eyed and say, Daddy. But anyhow.
Daddy.
But
and you want them out of the house.
And you want them off the payroll ultimately. So there's a return on investment expected. But Hamilton thought that some sort of national debt was healthy. Mm-hmm. Now, how much is always going to be the issue.
Right.
But then you get into issues of things like fiat money.
Explain what that is.
Well, fiat money is essentially money that's not based on anything but trust and confidence.
Trust us.
Yeah, trust us. And so as long as the United States can maintain the trust of the entire rest of the commercial world, which means just about every other Homo sapien on the planet, then the debt levels may or may not matter all that much. Mm-hmm. It's when that trust evaporates that all of a sudden people are going to start calling their notes.
Right.
And that is a game that the United States started playing way back when. But way back when, you also had the idea of a gold standard and there being a gold reserve against which your economy is performing, or it's essentially backing the economy. Now gold standards have gone away, and now it's all just a confidence game.
Yep. And how long did it take for the United States to develop the trust that people would actually want to invest in it?
It went pretty fast, actually. I mean, the United States, it was pretty.
So countries saw the United States as an investment opportunity. There was some confidence that they could get their money back when they invested.
Because the United States was a massive commercial power, relative to the time. These guys were managing a lot of the carrying trade in the late 1700s. So I say massive, I mean, it's not like a world superpower, but they were significant enough that people said, these guys build good ships, They do good commerce. They know how to buy and sell and trade. These guys are worth a bet, and that's especially the British, but also the French. So much so that the British and the French both tried to get the United States to back them in their various conflicts against each other.
True.
And the United States says, we'll have none of that, but we will move into your markets that are no longer open to you guys because the other belligerents are sinking your ships and blockading your ports. So if you're say a Dutch investor, and you're watching all this stuff going on in the 1790s and the first 2 decades of the 1800s.
Yeah, think about the French Revolution going
into the Napoleonic Wars and the blockades and all that sort of stuff. And
the United States looks safe.
The United States looks like a safe haven. They're rational. They're not picking sides. And they have all of a sudden expanded their commerce at the expense of Great Britain, their former sponsoring nation, and the French, their former ally that helped them separate from their sponsoring nation. So the Americans are canny enough to know when to ditch allies if it suits them, and also how to work with former enemies. That's a pretty good portfolio that you'd want to invest in.
Yeah, and so countries did. Today, the United States debt is $22 trillion.
That's right. And $22 trillion, just for the record, is $2 trillion more than the entire loss of property in the American South caused by emancipation. But that'll be a topic for
I was going to say,
different episode.
Interesting thing.
Yeah, but I mean, that's just so you can understand what we're talking about in terms of scale.
And my understanding is that there is debt that the United States technically holds. And when you think about $22 trillion, you go, well, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Part of it is built up over time. Some of it actually might be going back to the French.
Well,
and the French help for the United States during the Revolutionary War.
And Lend-Lease from World War II.
And then, all the subsequent events that have taken place. Some of the debt is never going to be repaid.
No.
And there's just that understanding between some countries. We're not going to repay the French. The French are not going to repay us for what we did in World War I and World War II.
Correct.
That's just accepted. So some of the debt is never going to be collected.
I think they call those write-downs. Or write-offs.
Write-offs.
In a corporate setting.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that debt which is sort of magic debt.
Right.
Now, some of that debt is real debt.
Right. And some of that debt is held by Americans through savings bonds, that sort of stuff. I mean, I asked my students how many of them have savings bonds, and there's typically 2 or 3 that got them from their grandparents.
I just cashed one in that I got as a wedding gift.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, it was $25 savings bond. I think I got $81 for it.
Okay. I have a $25 savings bond from a high school speech tournament.
Oh, wow. Look at you.
That last I looked was $87.
Yeah.
But I haven't cashed in. I'm going to cash it in when I retire.
No, nice
because
work.
I use it as an example every semester.
Yeah, you got to have that paper up. You could just go buy another one. I'm just saying.
I know, but it just shows how a $25 debt, in other words, the Lions Club gave $25 to the U.S. government.
Yeah.
The U.S. government said, you can
gave
get that
you
back.
Paper
They
that's
gave
floating.
You paper, yes. And they said, we'll give you that with interest when you cash that in.
After it matures.
Right, and it matured after 7 years.
Oh, that's pretty good.
That's why then it's now worth, I don't know, it was $87 several years ago.
Yeah.
So
a bunch of that national debt is essentially Americans investing in their own country.
Right.
And the reason our students don't have savings bonds is because they don't have a 401k yet. But every money manager always likes to layer the bottom of any portfolio with fixed income.
Right.
And fixed income falls into that bond category.
Right. Because the United States is considered to be a safe bet.
Safe bet.
Now, $22 trillion, the largest owner of U.S. debt involving other countries is?
China.
China. More than $1 trillion of that $22 trillion.
Yeah.
The United States Congress has said we will only accept a certain amount of debt. So they set a debt ceiling.
Yes, they do.
And Congress, therefore, when we bump up against that debt ceiling, has to raise it or they can't borrow more, or they go into technical default.
Correct. And so that's what the government shutdowns are always about.
Yeah, and here we are, since we're dating ourselves, time-stamping ourselves, here we are in May. The United States government is at this point actually at that debt ceiling. The Treasury Department is playing around with money to make sure that we don't go over that debt ceiling. But Congress has to raise the debt ceiling at some point in the future. So,
you know what it reminds me of?
I don't know. Tell me.
It reminds me of that time you load that really cool software onto your computer, eats up all your memory, then your computer doesn't work anymore until you dump stuff.
Yeah.
That's kind of where we are.
Here we are. All right. One other thing. One of the things when I listen to politicians and they talk about how the United States needs to get out of debt,
yes,
I laugh at them. And that's not a nice thing to do, but that's what I do.
Why are you laughing at our congressman?
Because the Constitution allows for debt. And there it is. The second power that's given to Congress is to is to go into debt.
And to think about that China model. China's going to want its money back, or it wants to make sure that money is secure.
Mm-hmm.
So it does not benefit them to get into a long, protracted conflict with the U.S.
Right.
That's why the Chinese and the Americans are negotiating partners. They're not always the best of friends,
right,
but they always show up at the meetings.
Right.
That's different than, say, the North Koreans.
Mm-hmm.
They own zero American debt. And so there's not a lot of leverage one way or the other in that relationship.
Right. The United States is dependent on China buying its debt.
Correct. And China
is dependent on the United States
buying their stuff.
And so what we've got is a mutually dependent,
codependent relationship. Yeah.
And that's always a subtext to the negotiations and relationships between those two countries.
Which is so different than, say, Russia.
Right.
Yeah, Russia doesn't have that leverage either.
Right.
And they're desperate to be relevant.
Right.
And so they act in different ways than the Chinese do. So
right.
Some of it's cultural, some of it's just straight up economics.
Yeah. And all of this is because the Constitution allows the United States to go into debt.
And I think that's been one of the genius things.
And so you think about it, and everybody complains about debt, but it actually has worked in American favor. And I think there's a growing consensus that we can actually go deeper into debt.
Yeah.
The question is how much deeper?
Until where do we hit the confidence ceiling?
Yes.
And that's a little tougher to define.
That's right.
But we have managed to figure out, or we've had a national genius.
Or we've stumbled into.
Well, or we fell backwards into, on how to manipulate debt to our benefit.
Yes.
And that's part and parcel of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And, right now we're at this conversation about how much capitalism is too much and how much socialism would be good. And one of the things that people need to understand is it has these ripple effects, that mix, that, how rich a mix of capitalism versus socialism do you have in an economy? And this is part of it.
Yep.
All right. So that's our line. Debt.
Good.
All right, so we'll pick up the next enumerated power from Article 1, Section 8 on the next episode. Thanks for watching.